This video covers Edouard Manet, who continues our tradition of pissing off the aristocratic class. He was also the inspiration for the term flaneur, but whatever. Hello everyone! Today we continue our studies of Impressionism art with Edouard Manet, who was different from Claude Monet, who we studied last week. If you need to fill in any gaps about Impressionism, feel free to start with that video, which I will have linked below. Otherwise, let's talk about Manet. Manet was a Parisian artist born into a wealthy family in 1832. You may or may not be familiar with Charles Baudelaire's term flaneur. If you don't know who Charles Baudelaire is, forget his name, because the important part is the word flaneur. There is no succinct English equivalent to this French term, but the idea, someone who kind of wanders the city, observing people and places. They are described as living detached from society, which, when this translated to art, meant that the flaneur would attempt to acutely represent the life of the city in their paintings. In order for someone to become a flaneur, you had to be independently wealthy, because who else can just afford to wander and observe all day? As you may be able to guess from last week's video, the flaneur variety of art was not particularly popular among France's aristocratic class. I guess the French elite preferred to live in denial about reality. Same. Some of Manet's works did find their way into the Paris Salon, but overall his paintings were ahead of their time in a way that was not accepted by audiences in the mid-1800s. One of these unpopular paintings in question, Olympia. This oil on canvas was created in 1863, and you may be able to tell from that initial viewing that this was different from other paintings covering similar subjects. This piece is considered to be in between realism and impressionism stylistically, but showing a nude woman lying down was certainly common practice in our previous art eras. We have plenty of odalisque paintings to draw from that spoke to a similar context as Olympia, but Manet is referencing a very specific painting with this depiction, and that painting is Venus of Urbino. Venus of Urbino was an oil on canvas created in 1534 by a painter named Titian. If you've been here for a while, you will know this is not the first time I have picked on Titian. This piece is obviously showing us Venus, who is from Roman mythology, but for this to be put out in 1534, it was basically pornography that you could hang on the walls of your home. Pieces like this were created with a transparently thin veil of mythology over top of them to justify a bunch of old rich guys getting off all day. And it was overlooked because it was considered high art. So in reaction to Titian's Venus, Manet creates Olympia. And with Olympia, he says, "Do what you want, but let's call it what it is." These flowers would have signaled to the audience at the time that Olympia was a sex worker. These would have been seen as a gift from one of her clients. Let's look at some of the ways Manet speaks directly to Titian's Venus of Urbino. The pose is incredibly similar in each of these, but with slight changes. Olympia is giving off a very different signal. To her, it seems that whatever exchange has just taken place, I'll let you use your imagination, was transactional and is now over. She's much more taut compared to Venus's kind of languid posture, and her whole thing is kind of like, I dare you. While their hands are in very similar places, Venus's hand is placed in a way that invites you in, whereas Olympia's seems to be closing you off. I definitely get the impression that Manet had fun trying to create the same pose on paper while sending an entirely different message to his audience. And lastly is the coloring. Venus's domain is warm and soft, but Olympia's is overly saturated. If this were a photograph, it would be like the flash was just way too bright. It distorts some of Olympia's features and is just overall less inviting. Also, if you were curious about Olympia's cat, the joke exists in the French language as well. I get the impression that Manet was saying, if Venus only wants you because you pay her, it's almost like she doesn't want you at all, to Titian. I can't see any reason this would have upset anyone. The arts and culture section of Google says, this profanation of the idealized nude provoked a violent reaction. Olympia was seen as so scandalous that pregnant women were actually advised to avoid seeing it for fear that the shock it would have caused them would harm the baby. This was not his only piece that called out the aristocratic class, as his painting Luncheon on the Grass drew attention to the common practice of wealthy men meeting sex workers in parks. Another fun fact about this painting is that he included the 3 discovered painting styles: landscape, portrait, and still life, but that's a tangent, so whatever. With these works, Manet helped open the floodgates for art that provided social commentary, and to some extent, art that attempted to hold the French nobility accountable for their treatment of the people. I hope you enjoyed learning about this piece today in our continued studies on Impressionism. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.